everyone. I am excited to talk with you today. Our topic is the idea of whether or not you should hire a resume writer. And this is not a sales pitch for hiring me. I will talk about the things that I've experienced as a resume writer, and that's where this knowledge comes from. But to be honest with you, I have a waiting list right now, and there are a lot of great people out there who can write wonderful resumes. The questions that I'm going to go through and the things I want you to ask of yourself and then a professional are the kind of person that you'd want to hire, because I'll show you a sample of the type of work that I do, which is to get you through the filters, but not to impress someone with mad graphic design skills. If you want something that looks like a graphic designer made it, you don't want to hire someone like me. So, again, this is not a sales pitch for hiring myself or my company. This is really just in general, whether you want to go it alone, be one of those DIYers, or whether you want to hire a professional resume writer. We're going to talk about the different considerations and including how much you could expect to pay to do that. So let's dive in and get started. If you have questions or comments, you can put those in the chat. I'm happy to answer those. Just a little bit about me, if we haven't met before. I'm Shauna Lake. I am the founder of Deep in Talent Strategies, which is a human resources and career consulting firm. I worked in human resources for about 23 years, and half of my time in my firm is spent with helping businesses with their HR and recruiting, and the other half of my time is doing career consulting for individuals in career transition or who are thinking about making a career change. It's unusual that someone works with businesses and with individuals, but it allows me to bridge the gap between the candidate experience and what companies are looking for, and bring you information about how to compete and win in today's job market, because I know what recruiters are looking for, because I am them. I am actively recruiting for some of my business clients. I am proud to be also listed in the top 4% of resume writers in the United States. So I have that knowledge to be able to share with you. And it makes me a bit biased in terms of the characteristics that I think make a good resume writer and the tough questions I want you to ask of the people that you might consider working with and hiring. But I prefer to teach and coach other people. So I do write resumes for people. A couple a month. I used to do many. In fact, in the month of January of 2020, I wrote 120 resumes in a month, and that was crazy. Was overwhelming. And I realized that what I enjoy doing the most is actually giving people the knowledge and the skills to know what they need to do to compete and win today, and to build a great resume for themselves. And not everybody has the ability to do that. Not everybody has the time, but there are some benefits to at least playing an active role in writing your own resume. And that's that you can speak to it more confidently in an interview if you at least played a role in writing it. So I'm going to talk about the process, the kind of the three common processes that people use when they go about needing to write a new resume or update their resume. And the first, option A, is where I was for the vast majority of my career, which is if I was going to update my resume, I would go to the last document that I used. I would add my latest position and responsibilities, and I would usually have to reduce the font and change the margin to continue to keep squeezing it onto 2 pages. And it was almost a game to see how many words I could get on a page without taking a critical look at the words and whether they really were still all necessary for what it was that I wanted to do next. And it is really difficult to write your own resume, and resume writers are no exception. Since I started doing this in my own business, I have actually hired 2 other resume writers, partially because sometimes potential clients want to see my own, and it's difficult to be objective about your own information, but also for some competitive analysis to see the process that other people use and to see how much they charge. So any successful business owner needs to know what their competition does, right? So option A is a really common approach. A couple of downfalls of option A are that if you have used the same Word document for years and years, it can become corrupted. You also could have some formatting that's no longer compatible with applicant tracking systems. For example, my own previous resume had a table of skills at the top. That was really popular for about 10 years, where you'd have like a 4x3 table and you could list your key skills. Well, tables are not compatible with a lot of ATS systems. So there are some things that could be preventing your resume from getting through the filter so a human can even see it. And sometimes starting with a clean slate of paper, it kind of literally a blank page is going to help you make sure there aren't any little hidden surprises that way. But the biggest drawback to just continuing to add on to your previous document is that it's really more of a shrine to the past than a marketing tool for what you want to do next. You just keep saying what you did. Sometimes we even copy and paste from a job description instead of critically thinking, what is it that I'm trying to do next in my career? And which of these previous positions are relevant and which ones are not? But then there's a strategy there as well. Generally, you want to go back 10 to 15 years on your resume, sometimes 20, usually no more than 20. But what if there's a good breaking point and then there's a position in the past that's highly transferable to what you want to do next? You want to get that on your resume. You don't want to leave off something in between that might have been a filler job and create a gap that didn't really exist. So there's some strategic decisions that need to be made there. And you can take a hybrid approach. You could talk to a career coach about some of those unique circumstances without actually paying them to write your entire resume. But then the option B, which is still in that DIY category, is to download a pretty template and then add your words to it. So the words still matter. They matter a great deal. You need to match the keywords to the job descriptions to score well on the ATS. And you need to appropriately tell your story about how you're a great candidate for what it is that you want to do. And visual appeal is important. I'm going to show you a couple of different extremes of what resumes could look like visually. But do know there are pros and cons with all three of these approaches. One of the biggest cons with option B is that if you choose a template that looks really nice, like a graphic designer did it, got it off Pinterest, or maybe you purchased it off Etsy, or even one of the templates in Microsoft Word, many of them have graphical elements that look nice and are not ATS compatible, like headers, footers, tables, icons, non-standard bullets, multiple columns. There are about 30 ATS systems on the market plus homegrown systems, and the rules are different for all of them. But for maximum compatibility, the fewer graphic design elements and special features, the more compatible it's going to be. And it's a double-edged sword because you want it to look really nice, and yet you want people to be able to see it. So I'm going to talk more about that in just a second. The third option is to hire a pro, and that's where we're going to focus most of our time today. So here are, I want to make this a little bit bigger so you can see these two extremes of different resumes. The one on the left is a completely ATS compatible resume and a common template that I would use. So if you were to hire someone like me who's an HR person who understands ATS systems, or someone who's a professional copywriter who's really gifted with choosing every single word in an intentional form, in an intentional way, it's going to look more like something on the left. If you hire more of a graphic designer, it's going to look something like more on the right. Now, the one on the right is an extreme example because it has a picture. I can't think of any circumstance in which having your picture on your resume is a good idea. If someone wants to know what you look like, they can go to LinkedIn. But this is this is a public use document, so I felt comfortable showing you this one, even though it has a picture. I'm not advocating for this style, but many of the others are other people's intellectual property, so I didn't want to put those into a presentation. But on the right, we have Janine, and it looks certainly more appealing than the one on the left, but we have icons. We have a table in her contact information is a table here. Her education is tabbed over, which is okay. And her experience is actually in the wrong order. So there are a lot of things that I don't recommend about this resume. But here are the things that you need to consider. What's your field? If you are in a journalism or a graphic design or a position where demonstrating your creativity and your skills in an area like graphic design where you want a portfolio if you're in a field like that, something on the left might be really disappointing to a hiring manager or a recruiter. They may expect, by the nature of what you do for a living, to have something that's more attractive. The other question to ask is, who's your audience? If you're applying and you have to go through the same process as everybody else in a more corporate fashion, and you're applying online where you're going to upload your resume into an ATS system, and it's probably going to go by an HR person first, they're going to gravitate more towards something on the left, and that's going to get you through the ATS systems and past the filters. If you're instead going to pass your resume to someone in person, or you're going to email it, it doesn't need to pass the filter. So it can be more visually appealing, and it can be something more on the right, like Janine here. So maybe you need both. If you are going to be networking and handing something out, and you're going to be applying online, maybe you need an ATS compatible resume that is still clean and professional, but free of these graphical elements. And then something that looks really nice that you hand out in person. But it's important to know what you're applying to do, the type of position that you're in, what you're going to do with the resume before you decide what you need it to look like. And that will influence who you may choose to hire, or the type of template that you may download if you're going to try to do it yourself. So now I wanted to talk about just a few things to consider about hiring a pro. I'll make this a little bit bigger here. There we go. So, why are some reasons that people hire a professional resume writer? Because they don't have time, because they're busy, especially if you have a job and you're looking for another one and you have a life. All of that can be a lot. Maybe you don't know what recruiters are looking for today. That's very common and very valid, because it does change. And maybe your current resume, you have one that you did on your own, or you even paid somebody to create it for you, but it's not working. You're not getting the results that you had hoped for. So maybe it's time to try a new approach, a new strategy. And this often looks like someone who downloaded a really nice looking template offline. They put their information into it and they began applying online, and it's not passing the filters. And the downside, there's a lot of downside, but one of the biggest frustrations of doing that is you often don't know. You sometimes never hear anything, and sometimes we get frustrated. We think that recruiters perhaps aren't being very responsive, and they're not communicating with us as candidates. Sometimes they don't know that you even applied because you couldn't get through the filters into the system. So the problem could be that the resume is just not ATS compatible. So we need to try a different strategy. But that's another reason why sometimes people hire professionals. As you're thinking about whether or not you want to hire someone, consider what you really do need. Is it just a resume? Is it also a cover letter? And yes, I always believe in cover letters. Many times they're optional, and you want to be the person who goes above and beyond. It can make the difference. Do you need help with your LinkedIn profile? Do you want some coaching and mock interviewing, or just some general job search strategy? So if you think about what you are looking for ahead of time in the suite of services that you would like, then you can ask for proposals from different writers and compare apples to apples of their proposals. And then also think about your duration. Is it just a one-time project, just transactional, do my resume for me, and then I'll ride off into the sunset? Or do you want someone who actually walks through the entire journey with you, which is more of a career coach? And those are two different extremes. Is it something in between? Or maybe you don't know yet, but you want the flexibility. So you want to hire someone that offers a variety of services. So just a few things for you to consider there. And then some other things that I'd like you to consider before you decide if you want to hire someone and who you might want to hire are a couple of spectrums here. One is the level of interaction that you'd like to have with the individual, the coach, or the resume writer. On one extreme, you have very minimal interaction. This may be that you hire someone through an online portal like freelancer.com or upwork.com, thumbtack.com, and you give them your current resume, a little bit of information. They do their thing, they send it back to you, and it's done. The other end of the extreme, other extreme is more frequent interactions or multiple iterations. I mentioned at the start of this presentation that I have hired two different people to write my resume in the past like 15 months. And that was really just to see other people's approaches and to do a little bit of competitive research. And one of them would write a section, and by a section, I mean describe one past position, then send it to me for feedback. And then I would provide feedback. Then they'd write another section and they send me for feedback. It was very time consuming on my part. And it also felt very disjointed. And I also realized later that they were charging me by the hour. And this was really racking up the clock. So in between there, you've got some moderately low contact, but a really responsive pro. And so I would say that's actually where I fall, is that I get some information from someone up front. I rely on my intuition and my experience to do the majority of the work where they go about their life. And then in a few days, once I get started, I send them the drafts and I get their feedback and then I make changes. Working with me, sometimes I have a waiting list, as I said before. And so I'll get information from someone and then I'll kind of put them in a queue. And I don't start something until I can finish it, like in that day or the next day. And so it might take me a few days to get started, but then I do it and I usually sleep on it and come back the next day with a fresh set of eyes and then send it to the client. Whereas other people, everybody has their own style and nothing is right or wrong. Some people will have 4 or 5 different projects all in the works at once, but my approach is different. But in the gap between the initial conversation and getting drafts, if someone wanted to check in with me to see where I was, I'd be highly responsive. So that kind of falls in that second category. And then the third category is moderate contact with frequent updates and check-ins. So if you prefer a pro that gives you a status update every day or every other day, then that would be something you'd want to ask on the front end or as you're interviewing them. And one of the other person that I've hired to do my resume felt like, I think she felt obligated to check in every night. Every night she would give me a status update of where she was, which I didn't need, but that was her style. So just some things to think about in terms of the level of interaction you'd like to have. And then there's the time investment, and I mean your time as the client. And so having experienced that, I've seen a couple of different extremes. So on one end, you have very little client time and it's nearly all on the pro. And then where I personally fall is somewhere between 1 and 2, some client time at the start and the finish, but it's mostly on me. The third step is a moderate time up front. That could be an assessment, an interview, and then some frequent interactions throughout, where they expect you to be available. One of the pros that I used would send some messages that kind of told me she was getting a little irritated if I didn't respond immediately when she asked for feedback or had questions. And I finally had to say, look, I'm busy, and that's actually why I hired you. So you need to know what are your expectations and what are their expectations, because the fourth category is heavy time investment. With some pros will ask you to do questionnaires or several assessments and spend hours with them before they get started. And then they may also check in with you frequently throughout the process. If that's what you want, great. Ask certain questions of a pro. But if that's not what you're looking for, that's really good for you to know as well. In my experience, the people that ask a lot of questions up front and interview you and have you do a lot of assessments, and this is a broad generalization, but it's because they're putting your information into a database, and then whoever they assign to write your resume will then have all of those notes instead of a small shop who is the person that you're talking to throughout the entire experience. I have, because I have online things that say I'm a resume writer, I have resume houses that will sometimes call me. And what they're doing is they're marketing their services and then they're looking for writers and trying to match them up. So in that case, the person who's writing your resume, you may never actually know or speak with. And that's why they need all this information from you to put it into a database for someone else to be able to pick it up and write. So just kind of know what that time investment and who's also working on your information. And again, if you have any questions, you're welcome to put them in the comments and I'll check them periodically. The other thing for you to think about is, what's the form of contact that you prefer? Do you want to hire someone through a freelance portal, a freelance site, and just communicate through that? Do you want to do email, phone, email, Zoom, some combo? That's kind of where I am. Or do you want to work with someone in person? Because that's going to narrow the geographic scope of the pros that are available to you. And it's going to come with a higher touch of service. It's also going to come at a higher cost. So many of these things have a correlation. As you move from one end of the spectrum to the other, you also move through the cost continuum there as well. And then some things for you to ask the pros, or do your homework and research, are: how long has the pro been doing this kind of work? Can they show you samples? Have they worked in your field? Have they actually written resumes for people who do similar work as you? And what's their turnaround time? One of the people that I had do my resume, I told you she gave me a status update every night. That went on for about 10 days. Again, I realized later she was billing by the hour, so she didn't have an incentive to finish it quickly. Whereas I personally like to do flat rates. So I'm incentivized to do a good job and get it to you as soon as possible. So that's not, better or worse. Just know what it is that you're looking for. But, will you get, how long, again, how long is it going to take for them to get it back to you? And then will you see it all at once? That sounds really funny. I had a woman call a few months ago who said, if I sent you the first page of my resume, do you think you could do the second page? And I said, maybe. Why do you only have one page of your resume? And she said, well, I hired someone to redo my resume, and she sent me the first page, and I went ahead and paid her for it. And she said she was just too busy and she didn't get it. She just didn't know when she was going to have time to do the second page. So I can't move forward until I get the second page. I'm like, okay, I cannot imagine just writing one page of someone's resume. To me, like, why would you not just go all the way through? But everybody has their own style. So now I know it's important to ask someone if you're going to see everything all at once. And then ask them how they stay current in the field. This is a way that you can start to realize or to assess the extent to which they know what applicant tracking systems are and what it takes to be compatible with them, what is and is not acceptable by a lot of systems, and just kind of what is their general knowledge area. Also, how do they stay current in trends in the hiring area, in that geographic area, and or in your field? How do they know what modern resumes look like? Are they certified? Do they go to continuing education? These are all things that are good questions to ask. And someone who gets offended that you're asking these questions is probably not the person that you want to work with anyway. Ask them if they have their own templates. If they're going to go, also start with a Pinterest template or a Word template. That's okay, but just make sure that they understand, that you want yours to look a little bit different than other people's, and understand the extent to which you want yours to really stand out, and what their process is. And quiz them on their ATS compatibility if that's important to you. If you need a graphically designed resume and it's not going to need to pass the filters, then that's not going to matter. Okay. So, how much should you pay for a resume? Uh, Make sure you're comparing apples to apples. I had a person a few months ago ask me for a quote. He already had three, and he couldn't really, they were so different from each other. He just thought maybe I'll just get another one and it'll make sense. So, what I did is I built a side by side comparison so he could see, in this professional is giving you a resume and a LinkedIn profile. This one is also giving you an assessment and some coaching. This one is a resume and a cover letter. So you really know exactly what you're getting. So it makes it difficult to compare cost if everybody's throwing in a few extra things here and there. Again, if you're more clear on the front end of exactly what you need and what you don't need, you might be able to you might get some more consistent proposals. Higher touch and in person will cost more. You can expect to pay a premium if you need a CV or a federal resume. So a CV is generally for someone in the medical field or in academia or in education. And it's usually something longer than 3 pages, where it goes into speaking engagements, publications, and more than your standard education and work experience, and maybe some soft skills and some technical skills and community service, the things we would see on a typical 1 or 2 page resume. The CV goes further. CVs take longer, and the people who have those functions are often people who are teaching and working, and they're very busy, and working with them takes longer because they're not as busy to be responsive. So a lot of pros know they need to build in a little bit of extra time to work on CVs, and they will usually charge you more because they're longer. And federal resumes are longer. Federal resumes go back much further in time, and they take longer to write. And so those usually come with a higher cost as well. But do ask if you're a student or a recent grad or a veteran, ask for discounts in those areas. And you can expect to pay more for higher level resumes. Higher level executive resumes are the ones that are more likely to be used for networking and not sent through an ATS system. So they tend to be much more professional and sharp looking. Ironically, they tend to be one page, whereas you have mid-level professionals that tend to be have 2 pages, and they're like me, working really hard to squeeze it down to fit on 2 pages. Executives usually have more hard-hitting statistics, shorter, to the point, and graphically designed so you can play with different margins and sizes and get things on a page. But it's definitely not ATS compatible. But it does take longer to do that. It's actually harder to make a really sharp-looking one-page resume than a 2 page resume full of words that takes up the space. So people pay a lot more for those executive level resumes. But there are also professionals that will just charge more simply because they think executives can afford to pay it. And that's not the right approach. It should be based on level of effort and expertise required. But to look at some specific numbers, on the low end, it's about $150 just for the resume. There are some people that will do it cheaper. Remember what your grandma told you about, you get what you pay for. If you have a cousin or somebody who knows how to do a resume and you don't have time, they may do it for free or less, but they also may not be an HR professional and professional resume writer. The other end of the extreme, the highest that I've heard is $7,000. A person paid $7,000 for a resume, and then they came to me and said, "Can you help me because I'm not getting any calls." And it's because it was a director level person and they paid someone to write a CEO level resume. So there was a mismatch in what the resume said and what the person was capable of doing, and it wasn't ATS compatible. And the worst $7,000 investment. So that's extreme. Don't do that. 150 is really low. I'm about 230. 350 is more of an average. But again, ask about what else you're going to get. Is a cover letter included? Some help on your LinkedIn profile? Is it going to have any personal branding assistance? Any worksheets? Any online tools? What else is included? 1,500 is a package, is an amount that you could expect if you're going to have an assessment of some kind. Some people will do Strengths Finders, DISC. I personally like the Strong Interest Inventory, which is a part of the Myers-Briggs family of assessments. But for 1,500, you could probably expect an assessment, some personal branding work, some feedback on your LinkedIn profile, maybe not actually creating the entire thing, but a resume, a cover letter, probably a session to help you build your story and tell your story, and think about maybe even a mock interview. But that might be about it. So that's if you wanted more of a comprehensive career coaching package, think about more like 1,500 as kind of an average. And I'm in the Midwest. Some prices may be higher on the coasts, but just giving you kind of an idea, probably 150 to 350 for a resume, maybe resume and cover letter, maybe one other thing like an assessment or a little bit of help on your LinkedIn profile, and 1,500 for more of a complete package. Okay. So where do you find a pro? Recommendations from friends and family are one of my favorite ways, because I assume they're not going to recommend people they wouldn't actually want to work with again. Thumbtack.com is probably the most popular for online resume writing. Upwork is pretty good, and there are some other freelance websites. Freelance.com, Fiverr, Guru.com. One of the things to watch out for is that I would recommend that you have a resume writer who shares the same native language of the country in which you're applying. So if you're applying for US based jobs, I would have a native English speaker. There can just be different nuanced words that can change the way that a resume is read by the reader, and can also tip someone off that perhaps you didn't actually write your own resume. And so Upwork and Thumbtack are two where you're more likely to find, if you're in the US, more US based writers, but they're on every platform as well. LinkedIn's ProFinder is also a really good resource. It will match you with people in your local geographic area, which is helpful, especially if you want to meet with someone in person. And then you could always crowdsource on social media, because that's where we can find everything from resume writers to furniture. And then finally, do your homework. Check their reviews and ask for their samples. Ask how many revisions you get. So, for comparison, for me, I do 2 rounds of revisions. Send you the first draft and ask for feedback. 50 to 75% of the time, people don't have any. Then sometimes there's a few little things, or maybe there was a question that I had for them. They answer it, and I send back another set, and we're usually done. 95% of the time, I'm done. Sometimes they'll come back a couple weeks later and say, "Ooh, can we add this?" So I'll do one more round of revisions for within 30 days. So ask how many revisions you get and how long that you have to continue asking them for changes. It is not okay to come back 6 months later and say, "Can you now make additional changes to my resume?" You should expect to pay an additional fee if you ask them to do more at that time. And it is okay to compare quotes and let someone know you're getting quotes to compare. If you want to get a quote from me just simply so you can take it back to somebody else, I'm happy to do that. Ask if they're familiar with national employment trends in the country in which you're applying. Ask when payment is due. Some people will ask you to pay at the beginning. If it's just a resume, I charge at the end. I want to make sure people are satisfied. The exception being before I do any kind of coaching or mock interviewing and my time is directly involved, then I do ask for that payment up front. Or if there is, so if I'm giving someone access to my online learning library and my job search playbook and my tools, that's my intellectual property, and I do charge up front for that. What is more common and what you should negotiate, in my opinion, is 50% upfront and the other 50% at the end when you get your final versions of your resumes and your resume and cover letter. That way, both of you have skin in the game to do this well and do it as quickly as possible. And then ask how do they accept payment. You want to make sure that you're on the same page and that you can submit payment in the way that they would like to accept it. And then finally, ask if they're going to outsource your resume. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, there are a lot of people who are selling resume writing services, and then they're going and looking for people who can write them and then trying to match them up. And the person that you talk to may or may not be the person who actually writes your resume. And that is probably not what you expect. So that can be disappointing because then you also can't form a relationship with them. They can't really get to know you and channel your voice into your documents, nor are they going to be easy to find if you want to make changes later. So tools for DIYers, if you want to do it yourself, continue updating those documents, but make sure you do it well and or work with some of your unique circumstances and learn, how do I minimize a gap in employment? What if I didn't finish college? How do I make my resume less ageless? You want to be able to answer those questions without paying someone to write your resume. I have some DIY tools I'm happy to share with you. I'll actually put a link in the comments here of this video that you can use the same link to get a quote or get more information about these tools. Normally, my job search playbook and my resume and LinkedIn masterclass together are 121. But for watching this video, I will give it to you for 83. And the same link that I'm going to send you to initiate that is where you can also get a quote for resume writing services. Again, not a sales pitch for my service because I actually have a waiting list that I'm not sure you want to wait on, but you can take it to competitors. And now you know what questions to ask of them and how to not be taken advantage of in the process. So if you have any other questions, feel free to email them to me or visit my website. You can send a question through the website as well. We have a company phone number. And if you are not watching this video inside of our Facebook group, I invite you to join the Deep End Job Search, which is a Facebook group of job seekers. We network, we share tips and advice, and we help each other through the job search process. And we celebrate those that are safely on the other side. So thank you for your time, and please let me know what questions you have. I'm happy to help you find the right pro to write your resume or give you the tools to help you do it yourself. And again, there's a lot to be said for the people who participate in writing their own resume because you can speak to it more confidently in the interview, but you can also then keep it updated and not have to pay a new pro every time you want to update your resume. So I am a big fan of coaching and teaching people of how to do that themselves. At the same time, sometimes we just have some unusual circumstances that make it difficult for us to know how to write the best resume. And sometimes we're just too busy or we're just not in the right place to be able to do that. And in which case, now you know what questions and how to find the right pro to help you. So good luck in your job search. Thank you for your time. And I hope that you have a great rest of your day. Bye bye.